It is 2 p.m. in New York, 7 in London, and 4 on a Tuesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Seoul's foreign minister will raise the issue of sexual slavery by the Japanese military during the Second World War at the United Nations Human Rights Council this week, amid denials by Tokyo about its wartime atrocities. ARIRANG News' Kim Ji-yeon starts us off.
South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se will address the UN Human Rights Council this week to raise the issue of the so-called comfort women, or women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. Seoul's foreign ministry said Tuesday Minister Yoon will give a speech in Geneva on Wednesday local time to convey the country's stance on the human rights issue. This is the first time since 2006 Seoul's top diplomat will attend a UN Human Rights Council session. Minister Yoon is expected to call on Japan to compensate the victims of its wartime program of military sexual slavery. The move comes amid Tokyo's continued denials of its past wrongdoing. Japanese media outlets recently quoted Japan's senior vice minister of education, Yoshitaka Sakurada, as saying that a 1993 apology for the sexual slavery system was fabricated, while calling for a re-examination of the supporting testimony. The Kono statement is an official apology issued by Tokyo's then chief cabinet secretary, Yohei Kono, to apologize for the atrocities Japan committed during its imperialist past. Tokyo's right-wing Liberal Democratic Party said those who were foreign ministry officials at the time should be summoned regarding the testimony. The LDP also said it will start a petition to call for a revision of the statement. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye has called for negotiations with North Korea to help war-separated Korean families confirm whether their relatives are dead or alive, and to allow cross-border exchanges of letters and video conference calls. During a cabinet meeting Tuesday, the president referred to her recent proposal to make the family reunions a regular event, stressing that at least 6,000 people would need to participate each year for all living family members to reunite with their loved ones. Now, President Park then said that government's new preparatory committee for reunification should initially listen to public opinion on the issue and draw up a blueprint in an open and transparent way. Meanwhile, the United States has slammed North Korea for firing 2 more short-range missiles, calling Monday's launching a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. So why did the North choose to carry out yet another provocation, and could this be a worrying sign of things to come? Our Yoo-yeon tells us more.
North Korea on Monday went ahead with another missile launch less than a week after it fired 4 missiles into the East Sea. The 2 Scud missiles fired on Monday had a range of 500 kilometers, more than double those fired last Thursday. The extended range means the missiles could reach South Korea and Japan. While last week's firing was met with a muted response from Washington, Monday's launch triggered a reaction. Speaking to reporters in Washington Monday, U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki said the U.S. wants Pyongyang to refrain from provocative actions and focus on fulfilling its international obligations. She also called the launches a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The North's provocative behavior comes amid the ongoing annual joint military exercises between South Korea and the U.S., and experts say it's not surprising.
I personally believe that we should be better getting used to this kind of contradictory behaviors, because we have to be aware that the North Korea made it very clear that they're going to pursue the so-called dual two-track approach. Meaning that on the one hand, they're gonna continue building up nuclear arsenals, but on the other hand, they're gonna pursue economic reconstruction.
So while North Korea is taking provocative actions in protest against the South Korea-U.S. drills, pundits feel Pyongyang will soon start making conciliatory gestures given its goal to reconstruct its economy. To achieve that, Pyongyang needs to extract the maximum amount of aid and hard currency it can get from the South. Now, experts say they don't believe the U.S. will refer North Korea to the UN Security Council for this latest provocation. Diplomatic sources in South Korea say that since Washington has a lot on its plate in Ukraine and Syria, they expect the U.S. to limit its reaction to a verbal ticking off. 유리안, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, back here in this country, in the nation's political realm, the sudden announcement that the main opposition Democratic Party would merge with a new party created by independent lawmaker An Chol-soo has shaken up the political landscape and raised questions about the main players. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Myungjoo explains.
The surprise merger between the Democratic Party and An Chol-soo's New Political Vision Party is widely being seen as a result of the sense of crisis felt by both parties ahead of local elections on June 4th. But more than anything, it has raised questions about An's leadership. The elections represented a major challenge for the opposition bloc, which would likely have seen voters split between the DP and An's party. Political analysts say the merger could place the bloc on a stronger footing against the ruling Saenuri party. But the merger has also raised questions about An's leadership style, particularly because the entrepreneur-turned-lawmaker has retreated from election campaigns in the past. First, during this whole mayoral by-election in 2011, when An yielded his bid to incumbent mayor Park Won-soon, despite his overwhelming support among voters. The second time was in the 2012 presidential election when he gave up his candidacy to support Democratic candidate Moon Jae-in just a month before the election. An's failure to follow through on his promises has raised questions about whether he was keen on avoiding risk or if his decision was just a strategic revision from his original plan to strengthen his political standing. The merger has also sparked criticism from the ruling party, which says that An's true colors have been revealed and that by joining forces with the DP, he ignored the public's desire for a new kind of politics. The two sides are now expected to go through the difficult task of shaping the new party's platform. But there are also concerns on both sides. Some DP lawmakers have said the merger is unwise, while An's aides have expressed concern about how many candidates each party will be allowed to field in the June elections. The DP has little to lose in the deal, as the party needs fresh blood to improve its standing with the public. An, however, is at risk of being absorbed by the larger main opposition party. Kim Myungjoo, ARIRANG News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Moving over to the crisis in Ukraine, the U.S. is talking tough about Russia's actions in Ukraine, with President Barack Obama warning Moscow that it's, quote, on the wrong side of history. Well, his comments come as Ukraine's military remains on high alert along its eastern border with Russia as troops prepare for a possible invasion. Our Park Ji-won reports.
Speaking to reporters at the White House on Monday, U.S. President Obama said Russia has violated international law with its military intervention in Ukraine.
I think the world is largely united in recognizing that the steps Russia has taken are a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine's territorial integrity.
While Obama stressed the importance of de-escalating the situation and called for international efforts, such as the deployment of international monitors, he also warned the U.S. had been examining a series of economic and diplomatic sanctions that will isolate Russia. Following the president's remarks, the U.S. Trade Representative announced late Monday that it has suspended upcoming bilateral trade and investment talks with Russia. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden is also urging Russia to pull its forces out of Ukraine. In a phone call with Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev Monday, Biden called on Russia to engage in dialogue with the Ukrainian government immediately. Meanwhile, it turns out Ukraine's ousted President Viktor Yanukovych requested Russian President Vladimir Putin use Russia's armed forces in Ukraine. This is according to Russia's UN ambassador, who read out a letter Yanukovych had written to Putin at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council.
Ukraine is on the brink of a civil war. The life, the security, and the rights of people, particularly in the southeast part in Crimea, are being threatened. So in this regard, I will call on the President of Russia, Mr. Putin, asking him to use the armed forces of the Russian Federation to establish the legitimacy, peace, law and order, stability, and defending the people of Ukraine.
Ukraine claims some 16,000 Russian troops have been deployed in Crimea since last week. Russian state media outlet Interfax earlier reported Russia's Black Sea Fleet had given Ukrainian forces until early Tuesday morning local time to surrender or face attack. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Now, the turmoil in Ukraine is spooking global financial markets, unsettling investors already nervous about shaky emerging market economies. While Russia's stock market and currency tumbled to levels unseen in recent years, dragging down markets around the globe. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
Western leaders are threatening Russian President Vladimir Putin with economic penalties for his troops' intervention in Crimea, but the financial system is already punishing him. The Moscow stock market suffered its biggest plunge in more than 5 years on Monday, before recouping some of its losses in early Tuesday trading. And the ruble tumbled sharply in a nervous reaction to Kremlin's gambit in Crimea. The benchmark MICEX closed 11% lower in Moscow, its biggest loss since November 2008. Russia's central bank tried to contain the plunge in the ruble's value on Monday by raising its key interest rate by 1.5 percentage points to 7%. It was the largest interest rate hike since the global financial crisis in 1998. Stocks in global markets stumbled across the board, with investors selling off shares, particularly in companies with exposure to Ukraine and Russia. The Dow Jones Industrial Average shed nearly 1% on Monday, but the European markets were hit harder, with the London benchmark Financial Times Stock Exchange ending the day 1.5% lower, and Paris and Frankfurt stocks losing 2.7% and 3.4% respectively. Stocks on the Ukraine exchange in Kiev fell about 12%, and the country's currency fell to a new low against the US dollar. Ukraine faces a possible default on its debt as Moscow is cutting off aid to its limping economy. In Asian markets, Seoul shares closed slightly lower on Tuesday after shedding nearly 1% on Monday, while Tokyo and Hong Kong shares rebounded on bargain hunting after losing more than 1% each on Monday. The uncertainties pushed oil prices higher, with Brent crude futures adding nearly 2% in London, and gold also gained over 2% to $1,350 an ounce to mark its biggest gain of the year. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, SK Group Chief Chey Tae-won said Tuesday that he will give up his executive board positions at all SK affiliates, including SK Innovation, which owns Korea's top refiner SK Energy Corporation. His comments follow a ruling by the nation's top court late last month, which upheld a 4-year jail sentence for him for embezzling company funds. Now, Chey, the head of the country's third largest conglomerate, was convicted of embezzling $43 million from 2 SK Group affiliates and funneling the funds into personal investments in stock futures and options back in 2008. Now, small and mid-sized companies here in Korea are relying more on the sluggish domestic market for growth than on the global market, and this is according to a report released by the Korea Chamber of Commerce. Domestic sales by small enterprises increased by more than 4 percentage points over the past decade, while their shipments to overseas markets shrank by the same margin. Now, citing that fact, since 2003, the portion of consumer spending in the nation's GDP has decreased by 5 percentage points as of the end of last year. The report warns SMEs will continue to see limited growth in the longer run if they continue to rely on the domestic market. The report calls on the government to back up these firms more aggressively, for example, by expanding consulting and marketing services to those seeking to tap into the global market. Credit card spending in Korea grew at a fast rate in January amid signs of recovery in the local economy. According to data released by the Credit Finance Association Tuesday, purchases made with credit cards reached $44 billion in the first month of this year. Now that represents a growth of 9% from the year before and the largest gain in 14 months. There was also a steady rise in debit card use, which accounted for more than 8% of all card purchases in January, up 2.6 percentage points from a year earlier. Now, the association attributed the sharp rise to increased use of credit cards to pay taxes and an increase in private spending ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. Now, it was yesterday, Monday, that President Park Geun-hye tapped a veteran central bank official Lee Ju-yeol to be the new governor of the Bank of Korea. Now, Lee is considered to be neutral when it comes to monetary policy, but he has emphasized the importance of communicating with the market. ARIRANG's economics correspondent Hwang Ji-hye has this report.
The nominee for the Bank of Korea's next governor, Lee Ju-yeol, says he fully acknowledges the importance of communicating with the market. During a phone interview with the Korean daily Joseonilbo on Monday, he said that the central bank has to gain the trust of the people. He went on to say that the central bank has to focus not just on the numbers, but should look for ways to be in harmony with the actual economic sentiment. Back in 2009, when Lee was sworn in as the senior deputy governor, he pledged to focus on boosting economic growth by working closely with the government. Whether Lee's perception of the economy remains intact is unknown, but the veteran central bank official is considered to be neutral when it comes to monetary policy. The presidential office spokesperson said that Lee has a profound knowledge of the central bank's business and has a good sense of the international financial market. Lee started work at the central bank in 1977 and has held key positions through the years, including as the head of the research department. Once he takes office next month, experts say that he will be preoccupied with matters such as how to weather the impact of the U.S. Federal Reserve's tapering of its monetary stimulus program. The nation's snowballing household debt will also be a concern.
Lee will have to think deeply in terms of monetary policy about how to counteract the real estate and household debt problems that are growing as major threats to the Korean economy.
The National Assembly will hold a confirmation hearing for Lee within the next 3 weeks. The lawmakers do not, however, have the power to veto the appointment. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
So President Park Geun-hye nominated a Bank of Korea veteran to be the next governor, seeking to avoid the controversies that have surrounded past personnel picks while boosting growth in Asia's fourth largest economy. For a closer look into this issue, we are joined live in the studio by Dr. Kim Myungjoo, the head of KLNP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program, who had been away for about a week or so. Well, good to have you back here.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Now, let's talk about this new central bank governor nominee, Lee Ju-yeol. Now, he is viewed as neither a hawk or a dove. Now, how so?
Right. The thing is, until I think yesterday morning, the day his nomination was announced, until the very last moment, we had about 10 names being named. And interesting thing about that is I couldn't see any hawks here. And that has also close bearing on the current situation right at this point. No one is asking for the higher interest rate or totally like a central government going independent here, because the global concern these days is low unemployment and also slow growth. So if anyone who's interested in monetary policy would be actually advocating, or at least avoid advocating higher rates. So no hawks among those 10 finalists whose names were printed in the media there. So obviously no hawk himself is no hawk. I don't think it's the case. The doves, there were names of the people who had closer ties to the administration, the executive part of the government here, such as the current head of KDI, for instance, and also the previous head of KDI, and also another professor at Seogang University who actually was a key architect during the campaign, 2 years ago when candidate Park Geun-hye was running the campaign, he architected her policy and so on. So these people had close ties with the administration. So whatever the government wants, they would be more willing to go along. So those names were being viewed as doves. Lee Ju-yeol's case, he's a total central bank insider. So in that sense, he has really centralist position. And when he was the senior deputy governor, he maintained a posture that was more flexible, inclining to neither side of the policy. So that's why he is viewed as a centrist.
Now, like you mentioned, Lee Ju-yeol has a long career in the Bank of Korea.
Right.
Now, what has his career in the BOK been like so far?
Mostly in the research department. He rose through that department. Inside the department, he was at the lower executive level when he began his career, and then he rose through that department, totally focusing on market research, basically. And towards the end of his upper level of his career, he also spent time as the chief of policy bureau as well. So what that means is he's very good at reading the market itself. He spent about almost 35 years of his career in the central bank focusing on reading the market itself. And then later on, he also was put in charge of communicating with the market itself, meaning that as the head of the policy bureau, he was in charge of communicating central bank's position to the market. So those were the two career tracks. He didn't really spend extensive amount of time overseas. So on the global side, he's viewed as relatively weaker than his competitors. But other than that, he's very, very much of a research man, economist, and very much a BOK person.
Now, in terms of what President Park Geun-hye was thinking in nominating Lee Ju-yeol, what kind of a message can we read into her decision?
Interesting question there, because Korean media, they're all over the board pretty much. Some people are saying, well, the local election is coming and he's from Gangwon province, so there was a regional, consideration that was paid into. I think that's a very, very minor, if any, indeed. But I think one very important consideration is, for the first time, because of the change of the Bank of Korea's law, for the first time, the governor nominee has to go through the National Assembly's hearing, meaning that National Assembly does not have to approve the nomination, but they'll have a hearing, and then there, all his details about his life will be publicized. So a president and her office must have been very much interested in finding someone who will not have controversial points, meaning that someone who might have spent considerable time in the public sphere. So that must have been one of the big considerations, the way I see it.
So for the first time, he would have to go through the National Assembly hearing. However,
right.
He doesn't necessarily need to get the green light from there.
Right, but the thing is, during the process, if there are all this, personal wrongdoings that are publicized, it's a political blow to the president.
That's right. Now, people have long talked about the reform or the need for reform of the central bank. Now, does Lee's nomination mean greater stability rather than change?
That's what most of the observers are thinking at this point. Kim Myungjoo, the current governor who's stepping down at the end of this month, introduced a lot of reform measures, and he introduced a lot of personnel reshuffling and all that. And there have been a lot of unhappiness about that. And when Lee Ju-yeol, the Bank of Korea's governor nominee, was leaving the bank as #2 person, he actually issued a statement that was going very strongly against Kim Jong-soo, current governor's principles. And he was talking about how the long-built reputation itself is being shaken in the name of reform and global focus, and expressing his extreme unhappiness about the current direction. So definitely, when the new governor comes after the National Assembly hearing and his formal inauguration, looks like at least the personnel side and the overall reform drive, we will get to see a different phase.
Now, what do you see ahead for the BOK's monetary policy? I mean, does being a centralist mean that he will not make any radical changes to the current monetary policy?
Well, the thing is, he will be very cautious indeed. Actually, current governor, they say, and the central bank made several mistakes last year, like in terms of missing the right timing in communicating with the market and taking action after when the market was actually expecting that. So he will be better in terms of handling those kind of timing issues for sure. But in terms of like raising the rate or lowering the rate, I don't think there will be a set direction here. He will be more of a pragmatist, as we have learned from his decisions and activities as the senior deputy governor in the past. So he will be a very flexible governor. At the same time, he will be very much focusing on strengthening the monetary policy tool, the interest rate as the monetary policy tool. So his focus will be strengthening the overall position of the central bank as a whole.
All right, Dr. Kim Myungjoo, it's great to have you back, and we hope to see you every day for the next few months, years, and decades, perhaps.
Okay, all right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now is a look at the weather conditions in your neck of the woods. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. Do join us again in less than 2 hours' time on Early Edition at 6.